Is that working? Is this one working all right? Okay, thank you, Jason. Good afternoon. My name is Dave Smith. I am the acting chairperson of the Land Conservation Committee, who is your sponsor for today's presentation. Larry was able to ask Mr. Cook to come over here and give us a talk about some river paintings and his own stuff, and Larry's going to introduce him, but it seems like most of the audience already knows him. He's going around glad-handing everybody. So that's and he's been here before, although I personally didn't see him. Two quick commercials. Well, first, what happens if the alarm goes off? Stay put. Thank you very much. Two little commercials for the Land Conservation Committee. Yesterday we did a little cleanup on the Loop Road and on Hanskin Way. So thank you for those who participated. And also on December 11th, which is a Monday, we're going to do the third of the Route 299 Adopt a Highway things. Jason will put that in the Chanticleer. We need about a dozen people total, maybe 14, and I hope some of you can join with us that day. Late in the morning, probably around 11:30, something like that. After the yoga class, that seems to be a conflict for some of you. After the yoga class. So let me introduce first Larry, who's the originator of this series. You might remember his rail trail talk a couple summers ago, got us all started. Larry's going to introduce Kevin, but aren't you glad to see Larry here? Please save your questions for the end, and I'll circulate with the microphone as we usually do.
Thank you for that introduction. And yes, I'm delighted to be standing here on my own 2 feet. And but I do still use my electric chariot if I have to get somewhere quickly or if it's a very long distance. Anyway, progress. Today we're sponsoring Kevin Cook, local artist, jointly with ArtScope. And the current chair of ArtScope, Michelle Cacavano, very much regrets not being able to be here to share the introduction. But as you may know, Flo, her partner, has had a difficult recovery from knee replacement surgery. So that's why Michelle is not able to be here today. So she very much sends her regrets. Kevin Cook is an accomplished landscape painter who, by the way, is a teacher of our very own Joyce Gartrell. Kevin has been greatly influenced by 19th century Romanticism in work. And he received a painting fellowship from the New York Foundation of the Arts. He has exhibited at the American Consulate in Hong Kong as part of the Artists in Embassies program. And he has been an educator at the Dorsey Museum, located on Newbolt's campus, and which, by the way, I recommended. Maura and I would go there at least twice a year. So I recommend that you seek that out if you haven't already done so. Kevin's work can be seen on the sets of TV's Billions. I'm not sure what that is, but perhaps you'll explain. As well as on the cover of a CD by a group called New York Pops. And he is represented in a number of galleries and has a strong regional following. I know that at least one member of the audience here has a painting by Kevin in their apartment. And the Hudson Valley Almanac has written that the Hudson River School of Painters would easily recognize Cook as one of their own. So without further ado, I turn it over to Kevin. Thank you.
Well, now that I'm thoroughly embarrassed. So I've been asked to come actually today and talk with you about, I'm sorry? Like this? Okay. I'll do the best I can. So I've been asked to come and speak with you then about the Hudson River School and their influence on tourism and eventually on land conservation. And we'll see actually through the course of the talk that those three elements were all kind of closely connected with each other. Just from the start, I will let you know that I'm quite an expert on the Hudson River School and not so much on land conservation. So I'll fill in with what I know, and hopefully we'll perhaps have some questions at the end.
Do you have enough light for your notes?
Oh yes, I do, plenty, thank you. So our first slide that we're looking at here is a painting by Thomas Cole. It's called the Catskill Mountain House. The Hudson River and its environs are today filled with many parks and preserved lands for all to enjoy, making it a highly desirable place to live. In many ways, a group of loosely associated 19th century artists started this trend toward tourism and land conservation. Known as the Hudson River School, these artists shared a love of nature and what they called the sublime, or evidence of the divine creator around them. Their romanticized landscapes became popular and collectible and created the very first American style of painting. Ironically, it was an Englishman, Thomas Cole, who brought this about. Cole grew up in England, learning the romantic poetry of Wordsworth and seeing the landscapes of John Constable. After emigrating to America with his parents, he set out on a path to become an artist, believing that art could teach noble lessons to one and all. In the summer of 1825, he traveled up the river from New York to the newly constructed Catskill Mountain House and made a number of paintings that summer. So you can see actually in this painting, he's showing you the Catskill Mountain House, which stood west of the village of Catskill on a high promontory looking over the Hudson Valley. And he's actually included himself in the painting. So very early on, you're beginning to see this connection between being an artist and tourism. His paintings were so popular when he went back to New York that fall, he was able to talk a shopkeeper actually into putting several of them in his window. He sold all of them for a whopping $25 a piece, and he was just delighted. So the following summer, he came back to the Catskills and began looking for other views, perhaps a little bit more afield. The American wilderness was suggesting to people kind of the limitless resources of our new country, and also this utopian ideal of living with nature. He began hiking to these other sites in the Catskills, and here he's showing us the view of Catskill Falls, which is a couple of miles from the mountain house itself. He places a Native American on this second ledge, very small. You can see it kind of smack in the middle of the composition. He does this to both suggest scale and to really kind of suggest the American wilderness as this unlimited resource. However, because this was already a tourist location by 1825 and 26, there were no Native Americans living there anymore and had not been for some time. So he's already showing us a kind of romanticized ideal of what this American dream ought to be like. Here he also chooses a view of Catskill Falls. In the previous piece, you can see there are two cataracts, and this is the upper cataract. So he's kind of behind the falls itself and looking out into Catskill Clove, this very deep valley that runs down towards the Hudson River. He was commissioned, even beyond this painting, to paint a view of Catskill Falls as a mural on an interior wall of a popular steamboat that brought tourists up the Hudson from New York. So here he was making this place that had already launched itself as a tourist destination to be able to experience what the Hudson River School called the Sublime, into something even more popular. A full generation later, a painter named Sanford Gifford returned to the site. He was born in Hudson and continued with the Hudson River School tradition of trying to find evidence of God in nature. He memorialized this upper level of the falls once again, and this time you're actually seeing a building there as well. This is Laurel House, which was one of 3 hotels that were built on top of the mountain. So there was Laurel House, the Catskill Mountain House, and then a huge hotel called Catterskill Hotel. Together, the 3 of them could house more than 1,500 visitors. So although we're looking at these lovely wilderness views, it was nothing but, or anything but a wilderness at the time. In fact, much of the mountain was kind of clear-cut of forestation at that time. So today we're actually able to go and visit these sites, and they're much more pristine than they were even then. Gifford himself was also drawn to painting the mountain house, and here you can see that he shows the mountain house along with this incredible view which it offers. So you see it's right at the top of this huge escarpment. It looks down towards the Hudson River Valley. You can see there's a little bit of smoke coming up in one place. That would probably be near Kingston, actually. And so he's immortalizing this view and thereby encouraging even more tourists to come to the area. He also painted this view. This one is quite famous, actually. You can see it at the Met in New York City. It's a smallish painting, but it does show the Catskill Mountain House at its site atop the escarpment. It also shows a little hiker coming in from the lower left. Quite often figures were put in again for a sense of scale, and this is still a popular hiking place today. Although today this viewpoint is known as Sunset Rock, back then it was called the equally sublime Bear's Den. Here we see a view by Thomas Cole of the very same view. You can find in both paintings the mountain house and the lakes. Cole also puts in a figure to suggest scale, also to suggest the idea that we're looking out into this untrammeled wilderness and all that we see is ours to behold. Cole also liked to put in other elements into a landscape to suggest the sublime. One of those you can see as a dead tree off to one side. He frequently liked to mention the concept of time passing in his paintings, as time is something over which none of us as humans have any control. He also put a lot of mist into the mountain valleys and the horizon and all. That was meant to convey the place between the physical and the divine or astral. So he's showing us, in a sense, a view beyond the veil into the heavenly, and suggesting that this is all ours for the taking. Here we have a painting by yet another Hudson River School painter. This one is by Jasper Cropsey, and you see once again it's the very same view as the others. By now, this painting was done in 1855. By now, this view had become so popular and was traveled so often by artists and tourists alike that it became known as America's first landscape. And anyone who was any kind of a painter of any metal would decide that they needed to go and just kind of weigh in on this view. So since I'm not scared off by such things, I decided that I would try and paint this view then myself. So since I am an artist myself and I'm inspired by the Hudson River School, I've decided that you get to look at some of my paintings today too. Here's my own take on this view. I call it the soul of the Catskills. And you can see the two lakes there, North and South Lake. You also can see the one-time site of the house itself. That basically it's much more wild today than it ever was then. You also can see, if you look into the upper right of the composition, there's a foreground set of mountains, and then there's a much bluer background set of mountains. The area between the two is known as Catterskill Clove, and that's where you would hike to see Catterskill Falls and all the views down the clove itself to the Hudson River. So here we're seeing a painting by Asher Durand, and it actually is the view from Catterskill Clove looking down towards the Hudson Valley, deep below. Durand was actually a contemporary of Thomas Cole. He also was somewhat responsible for Cole's success. Durand had, early in his career in the 1820s, had been working with a number of other artists and writers, and they were trying to come up with an idea for what would be the first American school of painting. What would we give culturally to the rest of the world? And in seeing the paintings of Thomas Cole, where he was memorializing the American wilderness in such a way, he thought, well, this is it. And so the two of them became friends, and Durand began kind of following Cole around to all of these places in the Hudson Valley as well. You can see kind of the familiar ideal now of untouched wilderness and endless resources, suggesting kind of a divine presence and helping to build this new national mythology. We kind of all remember being taught about manifest destiny in school, and so this was kind of leading to that. They felt that God wanted us to have this land. Here's a Sanford Gifford painting, also of Catterskill Clove. He's doing something very interesting here in that he's using an elevated or aerial perspective. If you look closely, it doesn't appear that the viewer is actually standing on anything, but kind of hovering in air in the middle of the valley. He did this on purpose to kind of suggest this deep valley, which he then accentuated further by putting the sun smack at the head of the valley. This created this enormously kind of luminous landscape in which you can kind of suggest the sublime, kind of even more so. You see the veil sort of between the physical and the astral world kind of being shown there. This became one of the seminal paintings actually of the Hudson River School, and you can see it at the Met as well. Gifford had a very close friend named Jervis McEntee. McEntee had grown up in Kingston. They became lifelong friends, and they frequently went out on expeditions together to make oil sketches. So here we actually have McEntee's painting of Catterskill Clove with his friend Gifford posing in the foreground. So once again, the artists are showing themselves being involved in nature, helping to create this sense of tourism and the idea that as viewers of these paintings, you would want to go and visit these sites as well. By mid-century, the mid-19th century, Gifford was returning to these sites again and again. this is actually called Ledge on South Mountain, which is part of the Catterskill Clove. And you can see that he's got several hikers. One of them, it's very kind of exuberantly tossing his hat into the air atop the cliff there. And so this kind of shows even more so that the Catskill Mountains have become this very active tourist destination by then. And once again, I'm showing you one of my own pieces. This is the very same site which you can hike to today. Today it's called Inspiration Point. And it's part of a very large campground now today called North-South Lake Park. You can go there and park pretty much anywhere. You can hike out to the site where the Catskill Mountain House once was. The view is all still intact. You can see the Catterskill Falls. You can come to this Inspiration Point. The park was not created though until 1929 and is now run as part of or by the DEC. The mountain house itself lasted until 1960 when it had been out of business for several years now. People's tastes had changed and they were vacationing much further away than the Catskill Mountains. By 1960, people felt that the house itself had become such a hazard that they intentionally burned it one night to try to make it safer. Here's another Gifford. This is called a ledge in the Catskills. So you can see one of the things he was really moved by was this idea of these steep promontories opening out into very deep space in the background. He liked that contrast very much of kind of earth and sky. So in the 19th century, it was thought to be a very manly pursuit to walk and hike in nature as a poet, and that it might and could contribute to a rugged, clean morality. An artist was also meant to be an explorer, searching the world for both the picturesque and the sublime. So here, Thomas Cole has ventured a little bit further north into the Adirondacks, and this is called Scroon Mountain. Sometime later, he reminisced in a letter to his friend Asher Durand, and I quote, "Painting this picture has recalled our Scroon days, and already in my mind they begin to take the hue of romance. Have you not found, I have, that I never succeed in painting scenes, however beautiful, immediately on returning from them? I must wait for time to draw a veil over the common details." So here we're given kind of a glimpse into Cole's creative process. He would make sketches on site and then complete paintings months later back in his studio, working from these kind of romanticized memories of what he had seen. And here is an Asher Durand. This is called In the Adirondacks. He shows us this very serene, almost untouched wilderness. And this actually is in contrast to the destruction of many Adirondack forests through logging. Accounts at the time in the mid-19th century record frequent log jams on the Hudson as so many felled trees were being floated down the river. The Adirondack Park was eventually formed in 1892 as more people began to adopt the idea that, as Thoreau wrote, this world is more to be admired than used. Here's a piece by yet another Hudson River School painter named John Frederick Kensett. This shows a view of Lake George. Lake George had become an established tourist destination in the mid-19th century, and by 1869 would have been overrun with tourists through the summer months. So here he's showing you this kind of completely untrammeled view of the place that no longer existed at the time that he painted it. From this vantage, though, of the tourist place of Lake George, you could actually then organize sketching trips out into the wild without being overly inconvenienced. In addition to making romanticized landscapes depicting this vanished American ideal, they would then make tourist art to help to finance their trips. To find these unspoiled views, artists needed to travel ever further afield. It was not unusual for Hudson River School artists to paint in the American West, or the Arctic, or Europe, or South America. In keeping up with the emerging studies of the time, they would have studied and painted unusual local flora, fauna, or geological features. Back in their studios, they would create finished works for a public that was hungry for new and remote views. So here we see a Thomas Cole painting where he's ventured as far north as Maine. And this is called Frenchman's Bay on Mount Desert Island.
Is that a figure up top there?
Yes, there is. Yep, there's a figure right at the top of the cliff. Don't jump. On the East Coast, there were very few such places left, but Maine, which had not become a state until 1820, was still unspoiled and remote. Cole began going there in the 1840s and began painting the rocky coastline around what would eventually become Acadia National Park. So here's a distinction. While the Catskills were already being touristed when Hudson River School artists arrived, Maine was not. Tourism began along the Maine coast as a direct response to the paintings being created there. Here we have a Frederick Church piece. Church actually was one of Cole's students. And you can see here that he's creating kind of a large study showing crashing surf. Here's another Frederick Church. This is called Schoodic Peninsula at sunrise, and also shows the area around Acadia National Park. Church was especially enamored of the sunrises and sunsets in Maine, and he made use of the newly available cadmium red being manufactured in lead tubes. Cadmium red, up until the 1850s, was a color that was used only very sparingly by artists, as it was so wildly expensive, and the pigment itself was poisonous, and so you would just kind of only mix up a very little bit of it at a time. Suddenly it's available in tubes, and everybody went a little bit wild. A critic at the time actually said that there was an epidemic of sunsets happening. This piece is again by Frederick Church, Cole's student. This is called Coast Scene on Mount Desert. So here, Church combines both the forces of the sea with the impervious kind of rocky shores. This piece is especially picturesque and sublime, and his skills made him the first true superstar of American art. He far surpassed the skills of Thomas Cole, his teacher. He went on to build for himself a magnificent home, Olana, which is in Hudson, and it's now managed by the State Park Service and is open to the public for tours. So, as Cole and Church, of course, went on to Maine, so in the next generation, Sanford Gifford decided to go as well. Here we have a painting by Sanford Gifford, and it says it's shown as the artist sketching at Mount Desert, Maine. Acadia would not become a national park until 1929, but early artists drove tourism to the region. And here Gifford is painting his friend Jervis McEntee. We saw a painting earlier where McEntee painted Gifford, now it's the other way around. together they're overlooking this little inlet down below, which would eventually become the village of Bar Harbor. It wasn't yet there in the 1850s. And here we have a piece by Jervis McEntee showing Sanford Gifford looking down towards the same basic view. Both artists maintained studios in the very same building in New York City, and both were Hudson Valley natives. They both possessed these kind of poetic souls, although McEntee tended a little bit more toward melancholy. And to be melancholy was actually thought of as a very favorable trait at the time. Today, he would be kind of a target for Prozac. Here we see another of mine. This is called Churning Surf. I've discovered that I don't tend to like going to Acadia quite so much, but whenever I get a chance, I go to Monhegan Island, which is about 15 miles off the coast of Maine. It's remote enough that you can kind of spend your days working in nature without being interrupted very much. And this has been an artist colony since around 1850. There's only about 40 year-round residents. They tend to be lobstermen, and even some of them kind of take up painting in their off time. So it really is kind of an island-wide industry to make paintings there. So we're going to come right back to the Hudson Valley now. We've gone far enough afield. This painting is by Daniel Huntington, who painted some landscapes, but was really kind of more known as a portrait painter. So despite this desire to travel further afield, there were surviving pockets of wilderness right here in the Hudson Valley. Our own Shawangunk Mountains remained rugged and relatively undeveloped. This piece shows Lake Mohonk and was completed just 3 years after the Mohonk Mountain House opened in 1869. So you can see there are several people on the water, but mostly we're looking at this untrammeled wilderness, which 19th century painters would have seen as especially sublime. Here we see a Jervis McEntee painting, also of Lake Mohonk. McEntee, who McEntee, who again grew up in Kingston, began painting in the Shawangunks in the 1850s. So this is this kind of romanticized version of Lake Mohonk. You see that he added an additional mountain in the far distance, kind of dissolving into the atmosphere, just to try to make the piece a little more picturesque. But you do see the very familiar cliff faces that are still evidenced today, so it is unmistakably a view of Lake Mohonk. In September of 1861, Jervis McEntee, Sanford Gifford, and their fellow artist Worthington Whitridge set out from near Ellenville on the 15th of September and hiked up through the Shawangunks, arriving near Lake Mohonk late in the afternoon. After a terrific thunderstorm, a brilliant sunset appeared along with mists rising off the lake. This is Sanford Gifford's plein air sketch of the event. There also survives a Jervis McEntee sketch done at the same time, so they must have been sitting right near each other and kind of working as furiously as they can while the light was changing. You can see that the brushstrokes are just kind of very loose and broad and just getting the main idea into place. The third person on the trip, Worthington Whitridge, eventually painted this painting called Twilight on Shawangunk Mountain. The three camped in the tumble of rocks below Eagle Cliff known as Humpty Dumpty for the night. Here is Whitridge's depiction showing both the campfire in the kind of center left of the painting and Trapp's Ridge to the far right. Years later, in 1879, after visiting Mohonk again, McEntee recalled the 1861 hike in his journal, writing, "I had not been there since 1861, I think, when Gifford Woodridge and I stayed there overnight on a walking trip. Now there is a large house there and walks in all directions and people everywhere in what used to be one of the wildest places I ever knew." So it's interesting to note that while we today feel that the Mohonk Mountain House helped preserve so much land, at the time there were those who felt it had been desecrated. Here's a sketch by Sanford Gifford. It's called A Path in the Mountains, and it shows Skytop with the Lakeshore Path down below. So if you've been to Mohonk, you certainly know this view well. There is at the very top of the mountain a kind of tall wooden gazebo. There were several of these that had been placed there until finally in 1923, the stone tower that we see today from the valley was constructed. Because it was so high up on the mountain, the wooden ones tended to blow over in storms. Here we see another Sanford Gifford. This is called the Shawangunk Mountains. Gifford eventually painted this studio piece, which shows the Traps Ridge, the low sun creating a romantic atmospheric haze, with Lake Mohonk in the foreground. The rock face to the left suggests being on a high vantage point, and it's most likely what is known today as Thurston's Rock, which you can kind of hike off to when you're heading up to the tower. Here's another sketch by Sanford Gifford called In the Shawangunk. This was done quite hurriedly as the light was fading, and it shows the Traps Ridge from near present-day Cope's Lookout, which is on the Mohonk property. Gifford also painted this more kind of stylized view of the Traps. An oval composition was often favored in the 19th century for their decorative qualities, and here Gifford shows the Traps with a tumble of rocks just kind of filling the bottom of the oval. And here's one of my own, Twilight at Cope's Lookout. So this view is still very popular today among artists and photographers both. It's frequently visited by contemporary artists. I myself have painted it so many times that a viewer actually said to me once, "Do you have a tent there?" This is another one of my own. It's called High in the Shawangunk, and you can see the tower itself looming in the distance. Today, the Shawangunk Ridge is a patchwork of many preserved lands, including those of the Mountain House from 1869, the Mohonk Preserve from 1978, the Minnewaska State Park from 1993, and other lands connecting to it like the River to Ridge Trail. Much of this land is perhaps more pristine today than it was in the 19th century. This is another one of mine. It's called Passing into Memory. And I wanted to kind of share with you something that Thomas Cole wrote while we look at this piece. In 1835, Thomas Cole composed an essay on American scenery. He wrote, "I cannot but express my sorrow that the beauty of picturesque landscapes are quickly passing away. The ravages of the axe are daily increasing, and the most noble scenes are often laid desolate, with a wantonness and a barbarism scarcely credible in a people who call themselves civilized. This is a regret rather than a complaint. I know full well that the forest must be felled for fuel and tillage, and that roads and canals must be constructed. But I contend that beauty should be of some value among us, that where it is not necessary to destroy a tree or a grove, the hand of the woodman should be checked. He also wrote that the tide of futility sets itself against the fine arts. Cole concludes, actually, in the hope that, though feebly urged, the importance of cultivating a taste for scenery will not be forgotten. Nature has spread for us a rich and delightful banquet. We are still in Eden. The wall that shuts us out of the garden is our own ignorance and folly. So that brings to an end my remarks, and let's open up the floor to questions.
I was really struck by the main pictures. I didn't know that that was part of the Hudson River School, and having spent a large number of happy summers in that part of Maine, really, it's really nice. So, hands. Okay.
I particularly liked your paintings, and I'm curious how long it takes you to paint one.
I get asked that often. Sometimes they go quite quickly. I can finish one in an afternoon, and then others go. I actually just brought a piece to a gallery that I worked on all summer long. So it just kind of all depends. I often kind of jokingly say that it took me 65 years and 1 day.
Thanks so much. This is very, very interesting.
Thanks for coming.
Would you go somewhere now, take a picture, a photograph, and then go back to your studio and paint from that?
Yes, so that's one of the advantages that those of us have today over the Hudson River School painters. They would have done pencil sketches and occasionally a color sketch done directly outside. But mostly their pencil sketches would actually have lists of the colors that perhaps the sunset were showing and all. And then they would just kind of work from those drawings back in the studio. Today, we do, of course, have photography, and as soon as it was invented, artists like Frederick Church started using it as well. The challenge is to allow it to become a painting without simply becoming a copy of the photograph. Thanks.
Can you talk more about that? How do you start from a photograph and make it into a painting?
Boy, who knows? Let's ask Joyce.
To us non-artists, that question needs to be asked and answered. But to an artist, it just happens, right?
It kind of does just happen, but usually with the photograph, I work in much the same way that Thomas Cole did. So I'll take photographs, and I may be looking through an album a year or two later and suddenly remember being there at that site that day and think, oh, that was so lovely, I want to make a picture of it. And so I'll have the photograph. The photographs I have were usually just sort of taken in the middle of the day. They're very flat light and so forth. But because I kind of want to romanticize it into this happy memory, then I'll sort of invent a sky to create a mood in it then. So I'm using the photograph for kind of the geographic features, but then the coloring and so forth, that's the creative part that comes into it. I hope that answers your question.
Will you talk to us about the colors that are in the Hudson River paintings?
Oh, sure. Many of them were the same colors that had been used from perhaps the 1600s on. Very early in the Hudson River School of Art, Thomas Cole was actually making his paints. So he would buy pigments. The pigments are kind of things that are found in nature. For instance, yellow ochre is actually yellow ochre pigment. Raw umber is actually umber pigment that you would just dig out of the ground. and then it would be combined with linseed oil to make the paint itself. By the 1850s, a company in London called Winsor & Newton had developed a way to put these paints already together, the pigment and the linseed oil binder, into lead tubes. So while it made it a little bit safer for artists, the tubes were still made out of lead. Did you want to know specific colors?
Aren't there just a few colors?
Yeah, typically we use just 7 or 8 colors in our palette, and find that it's possible to mix the rest. Part of what happened with the advent of being able to buy colors in tubes was that the companies making the paint thought, well, we have to just keep coming up with new colors all the time. And there are so many colors available that it can actually be kind of overwhelming. So most artists will work with what's called a limited palette of just 7 or 8 colors. Thank you.
Larry.
If I'm not mistaken, the Hudson River, some of the Hudson River School artists ventured not only as far as Maine, but to the west. I seem to recall a very large painting, many feet across and wide, in the Athenaeum in St. Johnsbury, Vermont. And it seems to me it was, I forget, Yellowstone or Yosemite, one of those now national parks. I wonder if you could.
Yeah, and that painting was very likely by a fellow named Albert Bierstadt, who was also part of the Hudson River School. He had maintained a studio in New York, just like most of the others did. And he initially went out west because he got a job as a photographer, where he was meant to go out into the American West with the U.S. Geological Survey and photograph these lands that were being mapped at the time. And this was then coming back to Washington, D.C. and kind of supporting this political idea of manifest destiny at the time. What he was doing, though, he'd come back with these photographs and then make gigantic paintings of them in his studio. And that did foster more tourism and this expansion into the West. This group of painters would take their kind of romanticized vision on the road, kind of all over the place. And if you look at a number of the Western views, they all kind of are suffused with this same atmospheric haze that we have here in the Hudson Valley, even though that's generally not the way things look out there. So they kind of kept sort of taking what they knew and then just applying it to these other more remote landscapes as well. They also went as far as South America, the Middle East, any number of places. Again, it was thought to be this wonderful pursuit if you were an artist and explorer. Yes?
This may be an impertinent question, but why landscapes rather than portraits?
Are you asking for me or for the Hudson River School?
Well, I'm not sure you can answer for them. Well, maybe they wrote on it. I don't know.
My own idea, and it kind of mirrors the Hudson River School painters, was that at the time when they started painting in the 1820s, about the only other landscape painter who was being known for his landscapes was John Constable in England. And Thomas Cole had met him actually a couple of times before and even after coming to America. Constable felt that it was possible to portray higher kind of spiritual ideals through landscape. Before Constable, a landscape was thought of as this kind of generic art. So you might have a picture of, say, cows in a meadow or something, and it would just be pretty, but it wouldn't actually mean anything. Constable felt that, no, this can mean something. We can put across these high ideals of what humanity can aspire to in a landscape. And he set about trying to do that. Cole did it as well. In addition to these landscapes, he did several large series of paintings, one of which was called The Consummation of Empire. And it's 5 very large paintings showing the same viewpoint in its primitive state, when a culture is first kind of formed there and a city grows, when there's a war there, and finally when it's just utter desolation and lying in ruins. And so he was showing us that this happens to all cultures, and we maybe ought to be careful. But he decided landscape was the way to do it. I hope that answers it.
Anybody else? Yes, sir, Ed. Do you have anything for your
She's heard it all before.
I want to thank you so much for bringing this presentation here today. My wife and I have hiked all the high peaks in the Catskills, Mohawk, cross-country ski, places just like that road. And boy, it brings back some wonderful memories, and I miss it tremendously. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Second go around.
This one is yours, it's up here.
Yes.
How large is that?
It's just 16 by 20, actually. It's currently in the window at the Mark Gruber Gallery here in town. You don't even have to go inside.
Anybody else?
I know everyone is aware of this, but these can never really ever reproduce the real paintings, which is why I'm going to see your painting in the flesh. Particularly the backgrounds. The skies in so many of these reproductions are sort of a flat white. But we all just can't be everywhere to see these things in real life. And whenever you have a chance to see them in real life, it's a lulu. Real lulu. Thank you.
It really is, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, as ever, the whole point of these presentations is to attract you to what we hope and usually is, as today, a wonderful presentation. We try to encourage you to pay greater attention to the landscape and the environment in which we are fortunate to be living here at Woodland Pond, and maybe make such recreational use of it as you may, if it's nothing more than a Sunday afternoon drive. I want to thank you again, Kevin, for being part of this ongoing series. As the once and future chair of the Land Conservation Committee, I want to let you know that the next in this series, there will not be one. We try to do it every other month, but in January there will not be one. But there will be one in March, and I can already tell you what it will be. So put it be in your mind and mark on your calendar, March 19th, a Tuesday afternoon. Ron Knapp, who is a retired professor of geometry at the college here, and a member of the Mohawk Reserve Board, who is also an expert on covered bridges. And he will be coming to make a presentation on covered bridges, past and present, in and around Ulster County. So I hope you all think about coming to that. Again, thanks a whole lot for being here.
Thank you very so much for having me, and thank you for being such an engaged audience.
Yes, my
You don't have to do it. You have people who take it and start with.
This is yours. Yours is got 250, just small. But then the big ones are like.
Cross on the top.